Hi there, Jason here for the Hagbayon channel and the Minasbad Shop Talks. Join me again for another conversation on blade culture. Last time we talked about the various Minasbad profiles, the native and the traditional profiles. We mentioned the round tip Minasbad, the saber type wide Minasbad, the saber type thin or pinaldus profile Minasbad, the sinaluyot, the klewang, and the binakla. And we also talk about the development of the Minasbad as per historical upheavals. We mentioned earlier that historian William Henry Scott was able to come across a Spanish record that said the Bicolanos used to fight with their kris and their baid. Now, I came across information via Professor Lawrence Lasco. Shout out to Professor Lasco when he forwarded to me a sort of a souvenir program for a blade exhibit on Southeast Asian and Philippine blades in Europe. The curator there mentioned the account by William Henry Scott, and it led the curator to opine that perhaps the Minasbad came as a later invention during the Spanish era, in that said blade is actually not native in Bicol but rather influenced by the Spaniards. That is just one finding. However, we also mentioned the Masbad incident, an account by Dr. Danny Hirona that when the Spaniards came, they found the Masbateños working on their gold mines, and that is why there is a theory that the Minasbad is actually a miner's blade used for slashing and for digging the ground as well. More so that there is a claim that the Minasbad actually came from Masbate or Masbad. Although we need to ask our friends from Masbate if the Minasbad is widespread or cosmopolitan in said island. There's also the Cimarrones angle. You see, the Cimarrones were a hybrid of the Spaniards and the Agta. They were actually Christians who actually revolted against the Spaniards. They went to the hills in disgust of Spanish rule, particularly the Mount Isarog. They went to Mount Isarog, and they were really fierce dissenters of Spanish rule. In being that they had Spanish blood and they had knowledge of eskrima, they perhaps must have devised a blade that is similar, or at least an approximation of the Spanish saber, and with handguard or the sagang. There's also Polix Robosa's postulate that perhaps the Minasbad got developed as a fighting blade because of necessity. The Bicolanos had to mass produce a sword that could counter the kris or the barong of the raiders coming from the south, particularly the Moro raiders coming from the south. And that is why Professor Lasco was able to utter this finding that the Minasbad with Sinaluyot profile or the Minasbad with uh, saber type thin or wide profile uh, were actually pantao. Pambahay for self-defense and pantao. They were not made for farming. They were not the type with dual function for farming and fighting. They were primarily for fighting. They were primarily for fighting. Now, aside from the sundang and the baid or the pantabang-tabang, the three major or main blade profile in Bicol blade culture would include the Minasbad, of course, the Ginunting, and the Sinampalok. So we will talk about the Sundang or the Baid or the Pantabang-Tabang much later. Last time we mentioned that the three main profiles of the Bicol blade include the Minasbad, the Ginunting, and the Sinampalok. Now, what about the Bicol Ginunting? Isn't it that there is also a Visayan Ginunting? Apparently, this is due to the Bicol Visayan connection. The Bicol Visayan connection. The same historian, Dr. Danny Hirona, in his book From Epic to History, he said that Southern Luzon or the Bicol, including the Bicol Islands, were populated by people coming from the south. Populated by people coming from the south during the early age or during the early development of the area. And that's why when it comes to nomenclature, there are what? There are similarities. In fact, there are also similarities in language, particularly in the areas of Masbate and also in Albay, Sorsogon, as to the Visayan language. You can even mention that during the early days, the Albay areas and the Sorsogon areas were called Ibalong. Or Ibalyo, from the word Ibalyo. The etymology is Ibal o Balyo. When the Bicolanos would ask the Visayans to transport them to the other side, they would say Ibalyo or Itawid. Ibalyo. So, the term Ibalong or Ibal came into fruition. And likewise, there is a place in north of Samar called Katarman. And if you think about it, it could mean kataraman, or kausap, or a person you are in constant conversation. Because the people from Bicol, particularly those in Sorsogon, were in constant mercantile and cultural interaction with the people of the Visayas, particularly the people of Northern Samar. So they were in constant conversation. That's why there's that place called Katarman. That is just one way of looking at it as per language. There's really a connection between the Visayans and the Bicolanos. That's why it will be expected, it will come as no surprise that when it comes to Bicol and Visayan nomenclature, there are similarities. However, when we talk of the Bicol Ginunting and the Visayan Ginunting, there is a big difference. There's a big or wide difference because when it comes to the Visayan Ginunting, said profile is actually the Bicol Sinampalok. Now we said that The three main Bicol blade profiles include the Minasbad, the Ginunting, and the Sinampalok. Now let us look at the Ginunting once again to remind us of what we had last time. So here's a Ginunting, a Bicol Ginunting vintage. Let's unsheath it. Alright. There. The pointed tip. It's very important because in Bicol blade culture, the Ginunting is feminine and the Minasbad is masculine. That is why when you combine the two, when you have a blade with general with general Minasbad morphology, but with what with pointed tip, as per the blade, we consider it a binakla. Here's another vintage Ginunting. You see, this one borders on the Wastari. Now, let's look at a sample of ang Sinampalok. Here's a sample of a Sinampalok. Let's unsheath it or open it, see it. Right. Sinampalok. There. This one is straight blade. The profile is straight. However, there are versions of the Sinampalok in Bicol that are curved, with curved blade. Now this happens to have the pinonyusan hilt with bronze punyo for punyo strikes, Carabao horn hilt carved as what? Kinulata but pinonyusan, and with bronze ferrule you can also easily observe the labor or engraving there. This is a sample of a Bicol Sinampalok, which could very well be an approximation of the Visayan The Visayan Ginunting. So there is the connection. For them, it's a Ginunting, but for us, it's a Sinampalok. For them, it's a Ginunting, but for us, it's a Sinampalok. Now, what are the various Ginunting profiles? What are the various Ginunting profiles? First, we have the Wastari type. We already showed you samples of the Wastari in earlier episode, but let us have another sample. This is a Ginunting with Wastari profile. Because here in Bicol, there are many types of Ginunting. Okay, this is the Ginunting with Wastari profile. Notice the Tari profile. The straight The straight blade. Okay, let us also look at the hilt. The hilt is made of albino Carabao horn with Bicol Tenegre hilt. In the Visayas area, the Tenegre is a bolo or a blade or a sword, but here in Bicol, the Tenegre is merely a what? It's merely a hilt carving. One of the hilt carving profiles. This one is a Tenegre. Now you can observe the barat or the lock, beautifully done. And then there's also a gardation made of bronze and not Carabao horn. Bronze ferrule, elaborate design on the hilt. There's also the so-called labor on the blade itself. This is a Wastari blade. This one I borrowed, okay. This is another Wastari type Ginunting. Wastari type Ginunting. with pinaniki, pinaniki hilt carving, but it's wooden. The ferrule or the tikala is what? Is stainless. Notice the straight blade. Notice the straight blade. And notice also that it is chisel grind. Chisel grind. Chisel grind. Another what? Indication of the Visayan and Bicol connection, because many of the Visayan blades have what? Have chisel grind edge. So here's your what? Pinaniki hilt for the what? For the Wastari type ginunting. Another type is the what? Another type is the ginugon type. The ginugon type. Let us look at some. Well, first a vintage what? A vintage sample of the ginugon. Here's one. Right? Vintage ginugon. Let's unsheath it. Let's open the blade. Let's open the scabbard. Here. There. In Bicol blade parlance, we say this is burad, or the pointed tip goes upward. Okay, it's not really straight. There. Here you can observe that the hilt is made of carabao horn. However, it's already vintage, so it has the look of wood. It looks like wood already. This is the so-called what kind of hilt carving is this? We call this the kinulata. Here's the what? Bronze ferrule. That's your Wastari. No, sorry. That's your ginugon type. Now let's look at more samples. Here's one. Another one. Ginugon type. Profile. Going up. There's also the belly. Pinunyusan hilt. Pinunyusan hilt made of carabao horn. It's a scabbard. Another one. This one is much smaller, almost like a knife. Let's unsheath it. Yeah. What? This is ginugon type ginunting. But this one is, of course, already considered a knife or a kutsilyo because of its size. Now, what are the others? Now we also have the palas. The palas. Here's a sample of a palas. There. Straight, but with belly. So straight, but with belly. Spine is straight, but with belly. The palas. Wonderful what? Blade profile. With wooden hilt only. Wooden hilt only. Of course, we also borrowed the dahong palay from the Tagalogs. Sometimes we have them available. We have them around. Here is our dahong palay. There. Typical farming what? Farming bone. Do we also have modern builds? You see, we have to consider if they are what? If they are native, if they are traditional, if they are modern, or if they are postmodern. We'll talk about the classification much later. We say modern if, for example, it is inspired, or if it is a rendition of a blade from another blade culture, or if it is inspired by what? By another build. For example, the Rambo knife. This is an example of a ginunting that is of modern build. Let's look at the profile. This is modern because it is inspired by the what? By the Rambo knife. You can see the profile here with. But likewise, it has Tenegre hilt with a Carabao horn. There, it's kind of a Rambo knife. Big Rambo knife, big and long. Actually a what? But actually a Tenegre. How about the shorter blades, the Sundang or the Baid? Okay, what is the profile of the Sundang or Baid? We'll talk about that next time. So please like and subscribe or share. Thanks for joining me. And remember, the pen is mightier with a sword. Thank you. Be safe.